Hello, and welcome to Rob from the Internet Talks About Beer, a show where we discuss different styles of beer, beer history, beer flavor profiles. We give shout outs to breweries we think make exceptional beer, and we talk about whatever else happens to come to mind during the course of our conversation. I'm Rob from the Internet. Let's talk about beer. All right, joining me today is Tom Rowell. I hope I pronounced your last name properly. Is it Rowell?
No, it's pronounced Rowell, like Powell, but with an
Rowell.
R.
Okay, see, my last name is Rowald, and people always want to say rolled. So I try not to butcher people's names, but okay. So we know it's Rowell, like Powell.
Yes.
Got it. All right. So if you could, Tom, tell me a little bit about yourself and how it is you got interested in craft beer.
Well, I'm born and raised in the hometown of the oldest craft brewery in Quebec. So it is a town called Lennoxville, Quebec, which is now part of Sherbrooke. And the oldest, what they call microbreweries in Quebec, is from that town. It's the Golden Lion Brewing Company. They opened in 1986, and that was the first in Quebec. And so I got into craft beer just from when I became of legal drinking age when I was 18 in Quebec, and just because that was the beer. If you wanted to go to the pub in town, you went to the Lion and you had their beer, and you just tried that beer. And then once I was in university and you're mostly drinking like fizzy stuff like PBR and that kind of stuff, I realized that, wow, there must be a better way. So I just started to explore. I always like to try new things and curiosity. So when I was in university, I started organizing beer tasting parties with all my friends. We'd get together, everybody bring a few different kinds, and we, share them and that kind of stuff. And it went from there. And since then, I've been one of this last sort of 15, 16 years, I like to consider myself as one of a big craft beer cheerleader. So anybody who I talk about beer, I'm always like, have you tried this new one? Instead of drinking that, Molson, you should try, this. It's a similar style. And it sort of just went from there. And I've done a bit of writing about beer, and I'll just talk about beer. With anybody who wants to talk about beer.
Awesome. Well, your mentality fits right into the same vein of the whole reason why I've started doing this series is just to try and get people who might be a bit intimidated to try craft beer to step outside their comfort zone to try a different beer, because you might like your Coors Light or your Molson or whatever, but I guarantee there's a craft beer that's in that same style that probably tastes a lot better.
I think that one of my biggest sort of converts was my father. My father drank Rickard's Red for 20 years. And then so finally I'm like, all right, let's try a few different things. This is like that. Here's a nice amber that you'll like. Well, he drank mostly Rickard's Red, but you know what I mean? So it's just like that kind of thing. And it was just trying to convert people like guys like my dad who are now in their 70s, or just like my cousin who works as a welder. He's like, I just want something cold and refreshing. I'm like, okay, instead of drinking Budweiser, try this lager from this local brewery. And just things like that.
Awesome. Well, today we are going to be talking about ESBs, and for people who don't know, that's an English style ale. Depending on who you talk to, it's either extra special bitter or English special bitter. Depending, there's a little bit of controversy on the history of the name, but to stay safe, just say ESB. Everyone knows what an ESB is. So the term bitter, which this is the type of beer it is, doesn't actually mean that the beer is overly bitter, like you get from a lot of those, what was it, the late 90s, early aughts, those IPAs where everybody was trying to out hop and out bitter each other. Just because it says bitter does not mean that the beer itself is actually bitter. The term bitter was used in England to describe pale ale since the early 19th century. It was used, it's funny, it started out by people who were ordering the beer. They would say, give me one of the bitter beers, because they wanted to differentiate it from, say, a brown ale or a stout or a porter, which are considered mild ales, because this has a little bit of a bitter finish on it, but it's not overly bitter. So it started with the customers, and then by the early 20th century, the brewers took over the name and started calling it a bitter as well. So for anyone who doesn't know, a bitter actually it falls into the family of pale ales, kind of like your IPAs or your blonde ale. Your Scotch ales fall into the same family. Your amber ales, so like your Rickard's Red and things like that, they're all part of the same overall family. They use the same base for the malts that they use to make the beer, but they add in a couple or substitute out one or two ingredients to give it different colors and different flavor profiles. Traditionally, bitters are cask aged, which is just a fancy way for saying they're stored at close to room temperature in a wooden vessel. And traditionally, they were served from those casks without any like carbonation to help draw them out. They were served via gravity. They just open up the tap, pour it into a glass, and there you'd go. Excuse me. Bitters have been called the national drink of England. To date, as of last year, standard bitters, there's several subclasses of bitter beers. Standard bitters made up 17% of all beers sold in England in pubs, which is pretty good. I mean, that must mean that it's a pretty what's the word I'm looking for? Pretty popular style. Sometimes my brain goes off in loops and I can't think of the proper words. Subtypes of the bitter are a light ale. So that's that looks closer to like what you would expect a standard pale ale to look like, and it wouldn't have the same color like this. This has this kind of ruddy orange brown color. A light ale would tend more towards the yellow end of the spectrum, little lighter, lighter even than your typical light ambers. There's a session or ordinary bitter, which isn't really made a whole lot anymore. And what differentiated that from, say, like this one, the best bitter, the special bitter, was the amount of alcohol in it. So a ordinary bitter was anywhere between 4 to 4.3% alcohol, and then you had your special bitter, which was like 4.2 to 4.7. But the standard bitter has kind of fallen out of favor in the last 75 to 100 years. So not a whole lot of breweries make it. Everybody when they make a bitter, they're actually making an ESB. So, let's just go ahead and take a drink. And normally this is where I would crack open my beer, but I happen to have a bitter on tap. I have a keg of it in the cooler, so I decided I was going to cheat and just pour a glass.
So what I'm going to be drinking, this is actually from the Golden Lion Brewery. This is try to put up the camera here. It's their Bishop's Best Bitter. It's named after the nearby university, Bishop's University. It's 4.8% alcohol by volume, and it's sort of a copper colored here. I'm just going to crack it open here.
Sure.
And it and as you can see, it's actually more bitter than your standard ESB. They sort of went through the brewers. They got a little bit creative with their with the term bitter. So when they were first starting out, they sort of were going a little bit. They weren't necessarily trying to follow some of the traditional styles, even though they are quite rare amongst Quebec breweries in that they do focus on British style beers as opposed to the more popular sort of Belgian styles that you'll see in a lot of craft microbreweries in Quebec.
Nice.
So yeah, so here, as you can see here, it's a nice sort of copper colored. It's which is similar color to a lot of ESBs in that it's not super dark, but it's got a nice sort of malty flavor to it. So yeah.
So you said it comes in at 4.8?
4.8, yeah.
Yeah, so technically that would fall into the premium or strong bitter category.
Oh, yes.
Because that's the cutoff. 4.8 and above is the premium or strong bitter. Equilibrium comes in at 4.7, so it's at the top end of the bitter category for ESB, and that's what I'm drinking. I'm drinking Equilibrium from Nickelbrook.
Okay.
So I don't get a whole lot of aroma. There's just a little bit of hop aroma. There should and there really shouldn't be in this style. When you're nosing over it, you should get more of a malty, sweet smell out of it with just a little bit of the floral from the hops.
Yeah, with mine, there's a little bit more of the hop flavor because, as I say, they went a little bit higher because the ESB, usually they'll top out in the sort of, usually the IBU range is somewhere in the 20s to mid 30s. This one's probably closer to 40, a little above 40. So I say they went a little bit hopper, so you get a little bit more hop aroma, but the malt, it definitely isn't as strong as the malt aroma you get.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. I mean, that's one of the things that I've said repeatedly throughout the series is it amazes me how different you can make a beer with just 4 simple ingredients. By tweaking it or changing one thing, you can completely change the profile of the beer. I mean, obviously, they're not completely changing the profile. They're just giving it just a little bit extra punch in the bitterness and a little bit extra punch in the alcohol. But but yeah, it continues to amaze me that you take 4 basic ingredients and you can make, I don't know, probably limitless combinations out of what's available to make different flavors.
I've always tried to tell people that brewing is almost an art form in that way, in that a good brewer, or just brewers can be so creative and come up with so many different combinations using, basically those same 4 ingredients.
Yep. So when you're looking at an ESB, once it's been poured into your glass, it should be clear. It shouldn't be hazy. And the color should be anywhere from gold to a dark copper, depending on which variant you're drinking. In terms of carbonation from a visual standpoint, looking at it, you should see very few bubbles rising, and if you do, they should be a fair small amount moving fairly slowly. It's not a super overcarbonated style. And when you take a smell of it, you shouldn't get any alcohol aromas from it at all. And when you take a drink of it, the alcohol taste should be non-detectable to slightly detectable, like a mild alcohol flavor, not like some of your super high ABV beers where you get that astringent alcohol taste from them. So when you take a drink of it, it's got kind of a low to medium malt character to it. It's not super malt forward like you'd expect with like a stout or a porter, but it's a lot more than you'd get from, say, like a blonde ale or something like that. It kind of rides the middle of the road.
Yeah.
And you might detect, as you bring it up to your face, you might detect some fruity ester aromas. You shouldn't smell any off smells. There shouldn't be any chemical smells or anything like that. It's not common. And the body should be, the body on a bitter can range anywhere from a soft, medium body to where it kind of lingers in your mouth to a dry one where you drink it and you're like, wow, I actually don't feel like I drank anything because my mouth is now drier than when I put this in there.
and the one from the Bishop's Best Bitter from the Golden Lion, it is a little bit more on that drier side to it. But it's a style that when I was first, basically they make, there are 4 standard beers at the Golden Lion. There's their Pride, which is like an English style brown. They have an amber, they have a blonde, and then they have the bitter. And that was what I just gravitated towards, and that's what sort of made me fall in love and made me want to learn more about this style, was this beer. And over the course of time, I've been to the UK. I've tried a few over there. I've been, obviously, whenever I see a craft brewery anywhere and they have an ESB, that's one of the first I will try, because it just might become my go-to style, because it's also a little bit unusual. Not a lot of breweries make it, because it's got similarities to the pale ale style and similarities to a few other styles. So not a lot of brewers go out of their way to make a dedicated bitter. And so it's always really appreciated when you find it, because as I say, it's my favorite style, and it's so unique compared to all the other styles, because it's not overly hoppy, it's not super overly malty, but it's just sort of nice. I've got a lot of positives from all over the place, and it creates this really nice balance to it.
Yeah, and it's got in terms of flavors, when you put it in your mouth, you get like a caramely sweetness, and you get that maltiness like from bread or biscuits, and then you get a little bit of that bitterness coming in from the hops, but it's not so much that it makes you makes you go, oh, it's bitter. It's like, oh, that complements that sweet, that cuts the sweetness just enough that it's a very well balanced beer when it's done right. And like you, it's one of my go-to styles. Nickelbrook makes their Equilibrium on a fairly regular basis, but every time they make it, it sells out. So when they make it, I tend to either buy a couple of flats of it, or in this case, I decided to buy a keg because I was there and they had a keg.
Well, one of my favorites, because I live in Ottawa, and one of my favorites here is from Beyond the Pale Brewing Company, which is conveniently located within walking distance of my house.
Oh, yeah, I'm jealous.
Yeah, I actually, because I live sort of close to the center of Ottawa, and there are actually 5 breweries within a 20-minute walk of where I live. And there's new breweries opening up all the time here. I think we're up to 30 some odd just in the city of Ottawa. And when I moved here in 2008, there were like 3 or 4 craft breweries in the Ottawa-Gatineau area. So it's just incredible how it's exploded. But Beyond the Pale, they only make it as a seasonal. It's called Breaking Bitter. And it's a really nice, it's more it's more similar to. It's not quite as hoppy as this. It's more similar to what you're drinking, the Nickelbrook, in that style. But it's really one of my favorites. And so whenever I always like follow them on Twitter. So as soon as I see them saying, "Oh, we have Breaking Bitter," I'm like, "Okay, I'm ordering, and I'll be over there with as much as I can carry, and then I'll be back tomorrow with as much as I can carry."
Yeah, I really like Beyond the Pale. I've tried several of their beers. I ordered them because obviously during the pandemic I wasn't going to Ottawa, but I ordered from them and had them delivered. And they make a fantastic stout called The Darkness, and then they make a better one called The Darkerness.
I'm a little guy, so the Darkness is a bit too much alcohol for me if I want to, stand and see. But the Darkness is honestly one of my favorite stouts. Before that, like my gold standard of stout was Saint Ambroise's oatmeal stout, because that was for me was the best kind of stout I want. And then I came to Ottawa, and Beyond the Pale opened up close to me where I was living at the time, and they made a stout that was just way better. And then I moved to a slightly different part of town, and then they moved slightly too close to where I am. So I've sort of been friends of theirs since pretty much since they opened back about 6-7 years ago. And yeah, they're just super nice people that work there. The owners and the brewers are all super nice, always ready to chat about beer, but they make some fantastic stuff.
They really do. I tried, like I said, The Darkness, The Darkerness. I've tried Clean Cut, and they had I can't remember. They had one that was like one malt, one hop. I can't remember what it was called.
That's their focus.
Yeah, and that one, and that was good. I mean, I think I tried 6 or 8 different styles from there. I just ordered a bunch of their stuff, and I'm like, ship it to me. I want to try it all.
Yeah, and they do make a lot of stuff. And yeah, but the Clean Cut, that's one. If it's a day like today when it's infinity billion degrees outside and super humid, Clean Cut, that's just a perfect after work beer. Just a nice, refreshing, and it just hits the spot after a day of work.
It's super, and it's super crushable too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right, so getting back to ESBs here, when you're drinking it, for people who don't know, there's different terms for beer. There's a finish, which is after you swallow it and you open your mouth, the sensation you have is the finish. So with an ESB, it should be a short finish. You should drink it. There should be a slight aftertaste, but it shouldn't linger for more than a few seconds, so that you're not like carrying that same aftertaste when you pick up the glass again the next time. The overall carbonation of this beer should be low. Like I said earlier, it should be visually it's low, but it is physically low as well. And it's some food pairings for people who might be interested if they want to try this. Roasted chicken, traditional fish and chips goes well with it. Any firm cheese, so your cheddars and things like that. Not your super soft, no camemberts, no bries, nothing like that. But your harder, your firm cheese, not your super hard cheeses, but your firm cheeses. Oatmeal raisin cookies, perfect use for an oatmeal raisin cookie. A lot of people get disappointed to pick up an oatmeal raisin cookie thinking it's a chocolate chip. Well, if you had a bitter laying around, boom, you got a good combination right there. And then it goes great with burgers and steaks. The malt and caramel flavor profile of the beer works well with the caramelized proteins and the char with the meat, which is another, it's one of my favorites when I am grilling or barbecuing.
I actually find it really goes well with a good grilled sausage, like a bratwurst or a mild Italian sausage. Again, especially if you put a little bit of mustard and a little bit of caramelized onions on your sausage, I find that pairing goes really, really well with ESB.
Yeah, ESBs. I mean, they're a good all around universal player. You can pair them with so many things because of their mild flavor profile and because of their depth of flavor. So they've got they're not just like your simple, oh, this is light and refreshing but doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. They've got a bunch of flavor, but they are light, and they've got a little bit going on in the aftertaste where you get that little bit of bitterness on the finish and things like that. So you can really pair it with a whole lot of different things. Excuse me.
Exactly, and I think that's part of the reason why I like it. I feel it's a bit of an underappreciated style because it's such a good style for all sorts of things. But because it sort of is close to pale ales, it's close to ambers, a lot of breweries sort of stay in those lanes and they don't necessarily try to reach out and put that sort of somewhere in the middle of it. But yeah, it's just a fantastic style.
And for anybody who's ever had a Scotch ale or they've had a wee light or a wee heavy, you're technically drinking a bitter. It's just the Scottish interpretation of the same beer. And obviously a wee light is going to be lower in alcohol, and a wee heavy is going to be a little bit higher in alcohol. So a wee heavy would be considered the premium or strong bitter, and the wee light would probably be more like the traditional standard bitter. You don't see wee lights a whole lot. Breweries do them on very rare occasion because they're not super popular. But wee heavies you see quite a bit. And Scotch ale, which is just a standard, which is just your standard bitter, but it's the Scottish interpretation of it. So
I've noticed that brewers that are thinking of doing it are more likely to do like an English standard bitter. For example, like Floral Hall here in Ottawa, they do a really lovely standard bitter, which is only about 3.8% alcohol. It's a nice sort of sessionable bitter, and instead of doing a wee light, it's so just slightly different style. But I think I've seen that more often to do that sort of thing as opposed to doing the wee light.
Right. So as far as serving vessel, so if you're looking to know what style of glass, the traditional is what I'm using. It's a nonic pint or a nonic pint, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So it's this is a 20-ounce version, so it holds a pint plus. It's got the little bump in the middle, which is designed so that when it's wet, it doesn't slip out of your hands, or if it tips over, it doesn't break the rim. So it's kind of cool, but that's the traditional. Seeing it served in a shaker pint is also acceptable. And technically speaking, you could serve it in a red Solo cup and I'd still drink it because it's a fantastic beer.
I actually don't own any of those glasses anymore because the last one I had broke. So I have a few shaker pints. This one's actually from Gritty's Brew Pub in Maine that is one of the first brew pubs in Maine. And it came, I don't exactly know how it came into this possession, but I've had this glass for about 18, 19 years. I think my sister got it for me one year when she went down there with her husband at the time. But it's always been a bit of a standard glass that I was like, it's like my favorite beer glass. So
Yeah. Well, this unfortunately is my last nonic pint. I had 4 of them. 3 of them have gotten busted. And every time I've gone to replace them from Nickelbrook, because that's where this one's from, they've been out of stock. So I'm always on the hunt for glasses. If I'm not using the nonic pint, I tend to use a Teku, because that also the shape of that does a great job of allowing the beer to breathe. But when you bring it up to your face, it funnels the aroma right up to your nose, so you're getting the full experience from it. But honestly, if you're out and about and you go someplace and you order a bitter and they serve it to you in a mason jar, just drink it in a mason jar. Exactly.
I mean, realistically, there's very few sort of countries or areas where they really put a real importance on the glass, and it's really a very much common thing amongst Belgian style beers. So for example, you get Stella comes from the chalice, Leffe's got its own, Hoegaarden's got its own very different kind of glass as well. It's a very popular thing, more popular Belgian thing than for British style beers.
Yeah. Well, and traditionally speaking, the British classic glassware for beer is either the nonic pint or the shaker pint.
And shaker pints, because they're quite sturdy, right? So and that's why when you go to the UK a lot of the times, I've been twice. Last time was about 2008, but that was when you ordered a pint. You go to the pub, order a pint of bitter, and you got it in. You're most likely to get into a shaker pint.
Yeah, it's because they're built like tanks. They've got that super thick glass. You can stack them, so when they're cleaning up, they can stack 20 high and walk them back to the dishwasher and not worry about it. And that's the same thing with these. The advantage that these have over the shaker pint is because of the bulb here in the center. They don't get that vapor lock, so they're easier to get apart when you have them stacked. But I don't know. It's just one of those things. Honestly, if you have the proper glassware, drink it out of the proper glassware because you're going to get the best experience. If you don't have the proper glassware, drink it out of what you have because you're still going to have a great beer.
And realistically, for most beers, the pouring technique is more important than the actual vessel. If you pour it properly, because if you pour it too quickly and you get too much gas, then it's not going to taste right. If you pour and you don't get enough head for the style of beer, it's not quite going to taste right. So the pouring technique, in my opinion, is more important than the physical vessel that you're pouring it into.
Yeah, and honestly, if it's a good beer, it's going to be a good beer no matter what it's in. It might be a better beer if it's in proper glassware, but it's never going to be a bad beer because it's in the wrong glass. Unlike wine, beer is a lot more forgiving in that. Drinking wine out of the wrong glass can give you a totally skewed perspective of what a wine tastes like. Beer, it'll just not be quite as good. It'll still be a good beer, but it won't be as good as it could possibly be. Okay.
Yeah, you get 98% of the taste of the beer. Oh no.
Yeah, right. So in terms of serving temperature, if you've got these, it's 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, which is 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit for my friends who use the Freedom units. I'm an American by birth, so I still have to, I have several friends who watch this and several other people who watch this who are from the States. So I like to give both Celsius and Fahrenheit. I was a science person all through high school and university. So for me, switching between the two is no big deal. But for some people, it just, what's that in my units?
Well, yeah, my grandfather always tells stories of different, because my grandfather was an engineer in like the 60s and 70s when Canada was going metric, and he always said that he worked for a big company, Ingersoll Rand. That was a big American company. So there was always problems like but when Canada went metric, it's always a bit of a difficulty like communicating. It's like, no, like you need to heat this metal up to, I don't know, 700 degrees Celsius. Like, what's that in Fahrenheit? Oh, more math.
Right, more math.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to give a shout out to a few breweries that I think make this style exceptionally well. Obviously, Nickelbrook's Equilibrium Nickelbrook does a fantastic job, and it's proven out because it sells out every time they make it. Skeleton Park out of Kingston, Ontario. They make one that's a traditional English ale, is what they call it, and it's a fantastic bitter. I tried one the other day from Robbins Brewery. It's the Trooper English Ale, so it's the one that was done with the guys from Judas Priest, and it's actually a fantastic English ale. It comes in right in the middle of the range for a best bitter, and it's got the proper flavor profile. It's pretty good. I got to give a shout out to my buddy Mike, who owns the Explorium in Milwaukee. He makes one called Doc Ray Scotch Ale, which is technically a bitter, which is a fantastic beer as well. And then Hobgoblin Ruby by Witchwood Brewing. They make a fantastic one. The Hobgoblin Ruby is a great bitter. How about you? You got any that you'd like to?
Yeah, the first I want to shout out is actually a really brand new brewery here in Ottawa called Shillow Brewing Company.
I've heard of them.
They were contract brewers for a little while. They're really small. They just opened up on their own in June, and it's a husband and wife team where the wife she's the brewer and he does sort of the business side of it. So I just was able to pick up a case of their a mixed case from theirs. And I tried their ESB just a couple days ago, and it's really, really fantastic. And I had a minute to chat with him. Ben is his name, and he was really, really nice and. Just a really, really good beer. I haven't tried any of the other ones yet, but I'm really looking forward to them. I also want to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Brad, who runs a company called Brew Donkey here in Ottawa that do brewery. They do brewery tours. So
awesome! I love.
So
brewery
basically,
tours.
you load a bunch of people into a school bus, and then you go around to 3 or 4 different breweries, sometimes distilleries as well, and you learn about it, and it's just a really good time. And they've been through a bit of a rough time with the pandemic and all that. So, but they're getting back going again. So if you're in Ottawa, I highly suggest taking a Brew Donkey tour. They take an afternoon, and the guides are really good. And you go around and get to try 3 or 4 different Ottawa breweries, of which there are many. One final shout out: they don't make a bitter, but it's another brand new brewery in the town of Quaticook, Quebec, where my parents live. They're called Hop Station. They make a few different new ones, and they just opened up. And they're really, really nice. And, if you're ever in the Eastern Township of Quebec and you're in the town of Quaticook, pop into Hop Station at the old Quaticook railway station. They make some really fantastic. They had a really nice red ale and a really nice IPA as well.
Awesome. So I love when people give shout outs to new breweries, because then it gives me places like, I guess I'm going to have to look them up and see if I can get some of their stuff. All right. Well, we've come to the logical conclusion of another episode. So, Tom, what do you got going on in your life that you want to tell people that you're doing, or things that you're involved in?
I'm not really involved in too much on the beer front lately, but my wife and I are actually just finalizing process to adopt a child from Ukraine. So it looks like we're going to be this winter. We're going to be in Ukraine, so we're looking forward to that and trying some interesting Ukrainian beers while I'm there.
Awesome. So will this be your first child?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
freaking awesome, man. So yeah, I mean, yeah. When I'm asking what's going on in your life, what you're doing, it doesn't have to be beer related. I'm just putting it out there because the show, even though the show is about beer and beer styles, it's also about the people talking about the beer. So I want to know what's going on with people, and that's exciting stuff right there. I mean, being a parent is simultaneously one of the hardest and most rewarding things you will ever do. This coming from a guy whose daughter is 25 and lives on her own and has for several years, I can look back on it with slightly rose tinted glasses. But it is a lot of work, but it's very rewarding work raising a child. So that's awesome, man. That's absolutely fantastic. All right, well. This is it, the end of the show. So until next time, I'm Rob from the internet. Cheers, Tom. Thanks for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Hey, this is just a post-episode PS. I forgot to say, hey, if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe. Hit the like button on the video. Hit the little bell if you want to be notified. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you have a suggestion for a style of beer you'd like reviewed or explained, please leave comments below. Thanks.